So, yes, obviously, the sudden obsession with releasing the UFO files is a convenient distraction from things like the Epstein files. That part is obvious. Everybody sees that. And frankly, the parallels are funny enough that the jokes practically write themselves. But honestly, I think the distraction angle is the least interesting part of this maneuver. Because from an authoritarian standpoint, releasing fragmentary UFO information is actually brilliant. Hi, I'm Nate Charles, and welcome back to the Rule of Law Brief. To understand why, you have to go back to Hannah Arendt and the origins of totalitarianism. Arendt understood something that most people still miss about propaganda and authoritarian policies. The purpose of disinformation is not necessarily to make people believe a specific lie. In fact, it's almost never about that. The deeper purpose is to destroy the public's confidence in the very existence of truth itself. As Arendt put it, the ideal subject of totalitarian rule is not the convinced Nazi or the convinced communist, but people for whom the distinction between fact and fiction, truth and false, no longer exists. That comment from Hannah Arendt is one of the most important observations ever made about the nature of authoritarianism. Because once people stop believing they can know what's true, they stop making political judgments based on their perception of truth. They stop rooting their logic in evidence. Instead, they start making judgments based on tribe, emotion, identity, fear, and loyalty. And those are the political environments where authoritarianism thrives. The authoritarian objective that Hannah Arendt identified is to flood the public sphere with so much contradictory information, so much ambiguity, so much uncertainty that people stop believing in the possibility of truth itself. And that's why this UFO-file strategy is so brilliant. Now, to be clear, 99 times out of 100, transparency in government is a good thing. Open records, public accountability, disclosure of information, those are fundamentally democratic principles. In most cases, the vast majority of cases, more transparency weakens authoritarianism because it limits the government's ability to operate through secrecy and coercion. And acknowledging that reality is important because I'm not trying to argue that governments should hide information from the public. Far from it. What I am saying is that these particular disclosures function differently from ordinary transparency. Because normally, transparency clarifies. Normally, disclosure resolves uncertainty. Normally, releasing documents helps the public converge on a more accurate understanding of their political reality. But these UFO disclosures are unique because they overwhelmingly do not contain answers. They contain fragments, ambiguities, contradictions, unexplained phenomena, incomplete evidence, conflicting testimony, redactions, footage without context, and reports without conclusion. In other words, if you picked all of the documents that exist within the US government archives, you couldn't find a better set that objectively create more confusion rather than less. And there's significance to that. Authoritarian systems do not necessarily need people to believe a specific falsehood. They just need people to become so overwhelmed, so skeptical, and so psychologically exhausted that they stop believing certainty is possible at all. And it tends to support a situation in which people become more skeptical of everything: the government, the media, scientists, experts, institutions, even their own ability to evaluate reality. Again, the objective here is not necessarily to convince people that aliens are real. Honestly, whether portions of the material are true, false, incomplete, manipulated, misunderstood, or entirely fabricated almost doesn't matter in terms of the political effect that the Trump administration is going for here. The effect is destabilization itself. The objective is to create a society where nobody feels capable of knowing what's real. And that matters because the rule of law itself depends on shared reality. Our legal system only functions if we accept that evidence can establish facts within a reasonable degree of certainty. Our legal system only works because it assumes there is such thing as objective truth. Now, it may be imperfectly understood, it may be disputed, it may be filtered through imperfect institutions, but there is still an objective reality. Once you destroy the idea of objective truth, the law itself becomes impossible. If every document is fake, if every witness is lying, if every video is manipulated, and every institution is corrupt, then legal judgment no longer rests on evidence. It rests entirely on the thing that authoritarians seek and manipulate itself: power. Just power. In that environment, the vacuum gets filled by strongmen, cult of personality, and authoritarian rule. Arendt warned us about this. She wrote powerfully and prophetically, a people that can no longer believe anything cannot make up its own mind. It is deprived not only of its capacity to act, but also of its capacity to think.